if it's democracy versus powerful global monopolies, then the democratic representatives need to stick together, and they did in Australia. And I suspect if they fractured, we wouldn't have been successful in landing this.
Was there kind of like a public interest behind this? Was there a movement in Australia, a citizens movement that kind of brought this around?
Wow.
Or was this just kind of, some of those things that politicians whip out of their bag, before an election?
The history of this is that we changed we have a very tightly controlled media section, and it used to be linked to how many papers and radio stations. It was to drive diversity. And they reviewed that, recognising that, print, radio and TV are all collapsing into the one thing in 2017. And this review was part of the deal to get the legislation to change the media ownership laws. So this was an 18-month process by the ACCC. But why did it happen? There wasn't huge public groundswell. This is purely because a conservative guy, it's because Rupert Murdoch, who is our biggest media proprietor, who you've heard of, I'm sure, Fox News and all that, he wanted it. So there aren't pure motives behind the politics of it, and we're from the other side of politics too. The Prime Minister, we're a progressive think tank, but our view is, even though it's being done maybe for the wrong reasons, the outcome is a good outcome, because it's not just Murdoch, it's the other proprietors. It's The Guardian, who's a new entrant in Australia but is doing very well. It's our national broadcaster. They all and small broadcasters. Any media company that is bringing in over 150,000 Australian dollars has access to the code.
I would just like to know, in your opinion, what you think the implications of decisions or codes or even actions of Facebook, like these kind of actions, what implications do they have in the larger global atmosphere, where we're trying to regulate big tech more stringently, whether that's in the EU, whether that's in the US, whether that's in India or Australia. So just what you think this might do for future trends in terms of regulation.
I think there's a global struggle going on between these big companies and democratically elected governments, and also probably not non-democratically elected governments as well around the globe, on the rights of a nation state to regulate the way technology operates in their jurisdiction. You're right, sometimes it's for noble means, sometimes it's not, and not all regulation is good, but to get legislators used to the idea that they can regulate these businesses in the public interest, I think is really important. The big test for me is going to be what happens part of the package is data protection. And I think that's the really big one that's going to follow the media bargaining code. And I'm saying to a lot of the newspapers, you guys have been very, very aggressive in getting a code that puts more money in your pocket. I hope you're going to be just as aggressive when we're pushing for citizens' rights on how their personal information is used. So time will tell on that.
You mentioned India as a big country, our market's much bigger. So what are lessons that you think potentially India can learn from this whole episode of what we've seen unfold in Australia over the last few years, I would say 3 to 4 years?
Look, I think if you take a step back, there were two critical elements about the regulation in Australia. One, that it was evidence-based. It was a really solid process. And if you just look at the executive summary, it's very, very rigorous. So make it evidence-based, don't make it just about politics. And the second thing is this had not just bipartisan support, but multi-partisan support. Now, so because all the elected representatives recognised the need to regulate the platforms, it meant that you couldn't pull, in a way, if it's democracy versus powerful global monopolies, then the democratic representatives need to stick together, and they did in Australia. And I suspect if they fractured, we wouldn't have been successful in landing this.